Mayor Kewitt. And online, we also have Mike Fox online. In the room, we've got Mayor Blackburn, Commissioner Babbitts, Commissioner Anderson. And I think, is there anybody else that we have?
Grant Paulson.
And Grant's gonna be, because Mayor Blackburn has to step out. And Mayor Keeper. First up, has anyone had a chance to review the 2/6/2023 minutes? All right, any changes? Hearing none, we will move forward and move into our action items. Michael?
All right, so the main action item is the biological opinion. I'm gonna cover it here instead of on down. We had some updates we needed to make, or the ODOT needed to make. This has been made, they were sent to FHWA. We got responses back from FHWA around the 20th of February. The emails and the information are in the packet. We have not received any comments from ODOT. So we will follow up with them. I know they had a little bit of a mix up on an email that was sent. It didn't get sent to the right people. But we are planning to have WSP resubmit their material based on the FHWA comments this week. So we will continue to coordinate with ODOT on any additional comments they have on the biological assessment or biological opinion. So it's progressing, but a little concerned that we haven't heard anything from ODOT yet. It's been a couple weeks.
Should we not reach back out to ODOT and
We
ask them where is it?
Yeah, we did that last week, and that's when I found out that, and you'll see it in the packet, the email that Carol sent. She had inadvertently, she drafted the email and put the CC people. And then before she sent it, she meant to go put the 2 people in the 2 line and hit send, and didn't realize she didn't fill out the 2 lines. So the people that were supposed to get it did not get it. But they were on the FHWA email that was right before her, so they should still be aware. So I know one of them was out for a little while with some personal stuff going on. So I'm hopeful that they will get back on it and we'll hear something this week. If not, we'll continue to reach out to them. We did reach out to Brian Winchheimer to set up a meeting with him to follow up. And then Kevin also has reached out to Dennis Wright.
It was to Tom Loins and Cash Cheslett, who are the actual authors. And then I left a voicemail for their boss. So that was this morning.
So we're trying to get some response to figure out where ODOT is on the review of the material. So,
Before you speak with Ryan, give me a call. I had a discussion with him, which I want to
okay,
share with you.
all right. So we'll continue to work on that. Communications, Jessica is out sick today. I think she sent out some review material for this month. So if there was any questions on any of that, we can address those, but she was not able to make it today. So, and then Mike gave him some comments. I think Marla had some comments on this month's communications material. So, all right. GR updates, just very quickly, Washington, we did our monthly call since the last meeting. We did a number of congressional calls with Hal. Just in preparation, we're going to start doing those every month. We may not do them in April since we're going to try to make a trip in April, but we are doing monthly calls now with the congressional folks. And then on the Oregon and Washington side, Oregon right now, the latest update that we received is that they are going through the semiconductor and housing discussions, and that's going to take another 6 weeks. And once that is complete, then they will get back onto other topics. So we may not hear anything from them until late April, May timeframe. Washington, the Senate, I've heard is going to put a proposal out that was promising for us. We'll see how it's received on the other side, and they are supposed to be completed by April 25th. So that'll be in good timing for us to respond to Oregon if something happens on the Washington side, that we can let Oregon know and hopefully that will encourage them to continue to move forward.
Should we make another push in both Oregon and plan it with a lobbyist in May? When they get back on transportation, and maybe should we do something in Olympia, aimed at the House? The Senate sounds like they're moving right along.
I don't know on the House side that there's anything we need to do on the Olympia. I think, if we get the CFA signed, and everyone has that signed in the next month or month and a half, then I would say, yes, we should definitely put something out and send that to them. Just to show the progress and that we implemented something they gave us, last year to do. I think that would be good to do. I don't know that we need to make a trip there. I think if Washington does program some funding in the next couple of years, then potentially maybe a trip down to Salem. Once they start getting their hands around what they're actually going to do with transportation this year, because I know there's a number of conversations of whether it's going to be an individual thing or it's going to be a package deal, and they're still working through that. And I don't think we'll hear anything else on that until, like I said, late April or May. So I would say coordinate with Dan, and if he thinks there's an opportunity to go down there and present someone, but that May timeframe might be a good time to do that.
Yeah, Mike, either go down or do some Zoom calls.
Do some virtual calls.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, who's Dan?
He is with the lobbyist for the port for Oregon.
Thank you.
On the bi-state authority, the port, since the last time we met, the port has signed the CFAs. The other 5 members are reviewing them now. And potentially we'll have signatures in March from the other 5 entities. So we'll continue to monitor that. Funding, finance, tolling, I'm going to hold on that because Carl's got a presentation that we want to walk through. And I'm going to reserve the last part of the meeting for him to walk through that. We'll need probably about an hour. We sat through it with them on Friday and just did kind of a preliminary run through. And based on that, I think we're going to need more than 30 minutes. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time for everyone to hear the presentation and ask any questions, and us get through that with them. They will be presenting that to the Transportation Commission on the 14th and getting down to 2 scenarios. And then they will come back out to see us on the 20th and the 21st. They'll present to us and then also to the Port Commission on the 21st.
Do we know what time on the Transportation Commission?
1:30, I think it's in the bridge update, the time. I think it was at 1:30 on the 14th.
I'll try to step in. I'm going to be up in Olympia that day.
Yeah, I was gonna try to listen to that too. On the grant submittals, the raise grant did go in for 3.6 million on the 28th. We also submitted a appropriation submittal to Murray's office and then also to Merkley and Wyden on Friday. And then we've got this Friday, another group of submittals. I think it's Cantwell, and then New Houses on the 17th. And Hal's still trying to figure out exactly the wording on those. We're going to ask for 8 million. He got some direction from Murray, but then got some different direction from Wyden and Merkley. So they're all kind of figuring out the right way to put that together. The main goal is a total of 8 million, and we're trying to submit it so it doesn't cancel each other out. So I think we're going to submit 4 on one and 4 on the other. What we're asking for is preliminary engineering and design, and then right away mitigation activities are the asks, but we're asking for 8 million total between the group. So we'll continue to get those submitted, and then they're working on how to kind of iron out the background details of that. So,
Is the raise grant, is that the non-moto?
yes.
Thanks.
And then the next round of big grants are coming up. We are preparing to update some information based on the conversation we had with the office, the Secretary of Transportation on the BCA. So there will be a follow-up meeting on the BCA with a group of you to just go through the BCA, the process for updating that, what we heard back from the DOT, and kind of how we're gonna address that. So we were gonna do that last week, we didn't make it, so I'll reschedule that with you to go through that BCA update and walk through any questions you have related to that.
Acronyms.
I'm sorry, the benefit, it depends on who you ask. It's either benefit cost analysis or cost benefit analysis. So it may be CBA or BCA, so cost benefit analysis. Like,
Yeah, when is the next round of grants, you know, the big ones that we're going in for? What month is that?
April and May, they start coming in. They have not released their official dates yet. Some of them just say spring and summer still. I think it was SS4A has April on it. So there'll be the next 3 months, well, not next 3 months, but April, May, June timeframe, we'll be seeing the NOFOs and things coming out on those.
So with that in mind, I think, are you going to have somebody with an HNTB with overall responsibility for putting together these grants?
Yes, yep.
Who is that going to be?
So Carrie's gonna be the overall lead on it, but Reddy has been helping him do that. And then Chris Kopp is gonna help with the BCA work. And then we've got a couple tech editors that are also gonna be helping that have grant backgrounds.
Okay, the discussion we just had on the financial review, I think that's really important for, you know, some of us, all of us, to understand the formulas and the data that goes in there. The other thing I'd like to hear maybe from Carrie at a different meeting is what are we going to do different to tighten up the grant so this next time around we hit a home run?
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of a strategy session of, hey, here's what was done last time, worked really well. Here's the areas that we could tighten it up even further. Here's a section that was average or below average. What are we going to do to beef it up this time?
Okay, do you want to do that at a bi-state working group meeting, or would you rather have a separate workshop to walk through that?
I think, why don't you ask the group who would like to be involved in that? And if it's not the whole group, let's do a working session.
Those of you who, if I might, just those of you who attended the debrief from the MPDG grant program that we had not too long ago, you know, I think we got a lot of really good information there, and there were some surprises. Quite frankly, to me, it's self-evident that this project is a safety improvement project, and we scored very, very poorly on safety. And so, you know, one of the things that we've got to do is get in there and look at the last application that was submitted and dissect it and really look at the NOFO and say, what are the questions they asked? Do we answer them directly? And if we need to create some spin around some parts of it, we've got to do that. Because to me, we failed on some of the things that probably should have been the easier parts of this. Other areas that I didn't necessarily intuitively think we would do very well in, we did very well in. And so I think that was an extraordinarily valuable hour that those folks spent with us.
So Carrie, something to think about, and for all of us to think about. I'm wondering if it's worthwhile for Carrie, for you guys to find a retired member of the transportation committee that has done these evaluations in the past and lay out the plan where we're done with our submittal early enough that we can run it by this person and do a mock review board on it with enough time that we can incorporate comments, you know, and then submit it.
That's a great idea, and I think we'll pursue that. We happen to have a few of those people within HNTV, but there may be others that would be able to really do that. You know, Chris Kopp is one of those people. As you know, Commissioner, he identified the fatal flaw in our BCA from last time, not our BCA, but the BCA from last time, and he identified that before we even had our meeting, and he was dead on. And so that's why, you know, probably the bulk of the work that we're going to do in upgrading these applications is going to be in the BCA, because I think we learned how much FHW relies on the quantitative aspects of that BCA in making their decision. It's really
Well,
important, and it's important, and they get into minute detail with it.
Yep, so I like, it's great that we got Chris on board. If Chris is going to be helping develop the details of the grant application, we don't want him on a review board.
Right. No, Roger that. I got you.
Yeah, and Carrie, I've had a conversation with Chris. He's looking at some names for that already.
Yep. Fantastic. And I agree with you. We want an independent review.
So to answer Mike's previous question, I do not feel like I would be adding a lot of value to be attending that review. I need to know that review is happening, but it is all very technical, and I don't feel that I'm offering any value. And I'm not going to speak for anybody else, but I simply need to know that it's happening.
Let me inject there, Arthur. I disagree with you, my friend. I think you would bring a extremely valuable set of skills to understand the formulas, because down the road, you know, we're going to be looking at this thing, not quite as good as an external review board, but we need to make sure that we've got 2 or 3 or 4 of our members that are really knowledgeable of this thing. It's so critical that we've got enough independent eyes looking at this thing, and we're looking at it from different perspectives. I would honestly welcome you to be part of that.
I'm happy to spend time. I had no clue as to how I would help. So if you're going to coach me, I'm happy to help.
Think how much you'll learn. And I agree with Commissioner Fox. You guys are the locals, and a lot of this turns into math, but it doesn't start as math. It starts out with value. What is the value of this bridge? And nobody understands that better than local people.
Who else would like to be part of that? Anyone else? Then Marley, you said yes.
Yeah, I don't know, I agree with you. I'm not looking at it from the technical side, but I just think every time we sit down with DOT, they're so into their strategic plan that I'd be interested to just go over what's being written and see if we're checking those like storylines boxes.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and the BCA is a critical part. We have to have a 1.0 to meet the statutory requirements before the grants even get considered.
1.0 being
1.0. It's the
benefit is
cost to
more than the
benefit
cost.
ratio is 1.0. So. yeah.
That's why it's so important that we really understand the formula that they use and the components of the formula.
Okay. All right, quickly, the treaty MOAs, we have, those are moving along. We actually have meetings now with all 4 of the treaty tribes. We'll be meeting for the second time with Umatilla on the 23rd of March. We do have an initial meeting now with Warm Springs on the 22nd. We had a meeting last week with Yakima. So those are progressing. So we'll continue to move those along, and we'll update you as key milestones, or we get key points in that discussion.
Yeah, the Warm Springs Tribal Chair is speaking in Hood River on Thursday night, which I was surprised. Are you going to be at that?
I know about Kat on Wednesday night, but she's Umatilla. I didn't know about Warm Springs on Thursday.
Sense of Place.
Sense of Place is Wednesday. And she's Umatilla.
Okay, my information must be completely wrong then.
Or mine. Kat Brigham is coming, I think.
I was surprised to see Warm Springs because of what was going on with their, okay, maybe that may explain my confusion.
I think it's Kat Brigham on Wednesday.
Okay.
Okay. RVMC, we're moving along with the RFP. The survey is just about wrapped up. They're just doing some touch-up stuff on properties and cleaning up some of the property information. Right away now has a list of parcels potentially are impacted. We're also getting some appraisal stuff together for the Washington side. to be able to appraise that property and see where it's at. Once we have that appraisal back, then we'll come back to you and see where you want to go with the discussions with the private property owner on the Washington side. We also met with the port this morning. We're looking at the process of just evaluating port impacts, based on the project, just so we'll have that data. And they're getting ready to pull all that information together too, for the impacts to the port, so. So we're moving those along. The geotech, we're waiting on one more permit. We believe that'll be in April, towards the end of April, early May, and then we will be able to get out in late May, early June, and start the remaining borings on the Washington side, and then the borings in the water.
Mike,
You're on
you-
mute.
So your timeline is to get all of the borings done by when?
June, end of June, I think they'll be done with all the borings, maybe a little earlier if the permits come in slightly earlier.
That gives you enough time to get it turned around and get it in the RFP.
Oh, yeah, we'll have that, we'll have all that data for the RFP. All right, so before we shift over to Carl, any questions? Sorry for running through that, but I really think it's important we have as much time as possible on that.
I have a couple of questions, and what I don't know about this is a lot, but two thoughts I had were, given that the Oregon legislature timeline is a little bit pushed back, do we want to be intentional about our discussions about the port's contribution? We talked about that at great length last week. Does that give us a little more breathing room to have that discussion with the port about local match to help our Oregon case? That's our.
I think it's just as important to have that information worked out for the Oregon side. I think the House side is the one that is funding the TNR study that's going on now.
I'm confused why you're comparing Oregon and House.
The House side on the Washington side. So I think the Senate is on board. I think the
Washington Senate, yep.
The Washington House is watching it just as close. And they're gonna be making their decisions in April. So I think
Their
the more
timeline is
discussions, the more discussions and decisions we can have.
Super.
Prior to that, the better.
Great.
And then I think we take that information and then, yes, we go to Oregon and
Great.
have those discussions.
Thank you. The other was, I watched the Union Pacific Railroad discussions about getting a second track through the gorge at the Gorge Commission. And my opinion of that discussion was the tribe's interests absolutely tip the scales. Is there any way we can make sure that the tribe's interests are included in the BCA to the extent that it's helpful to us, or is that formula well baked?
I think that's one of the topics we need to talk about is how we would include any benefits to them and how we would include that in the benefit cost analysis, because there are some related to that. I don't know how it was captured in the original evaluation, but they have told us that just in their commercial fishing, that having a new structure across the water would improve their commercial fishing ability.
Just seems maybe there's an opportunity to benefit them and to tweak our formula.
When we started this, we talked extensively about not putting oils and debris into the river, the ability to treat stormwater, to not have lead paint coming in from superstructure. So I just presume that all that was already.
They had greenhouse gas stuff in there. I know heard Chris talk about that. He had some questions about how the calculations were done that he was looking into to see if there was different ways to look at those calculations, but those are the things that I think we need to sit down and brainstorm through and look at the previous BCA, and if there are areas that we can improve on. Some of it, I think, is wording and how you word it and present it. And making sure we hit all of those boxes, because we're gonna have to make up a pretty big deficit. What happened on that was they assumed tolling as a benefit, and that is not a benefit.
Right.
That took us pretty substantially down from a 1. That with a couple other things, we're at like 0.3. So I think there's a number of things that we need to do to bring that back up. But it's going to take some reevaluation of benefits in order to do that. And we think there was some issues with some calculations that will help bring that back up, but there's still going to be some work to do to get that back up over a 1.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, before we start with Carl, Chuck Green is here. He was helping pursue the project, been involved in the port projects for years, so he had some things he wanted to just talk to you about.
We should use the microphone.
Hey, Michael. you said that.
So I'm Chuck Green with OTAC. And I've been on the project program management team as the contracts procurement lead. I've actually been bringing 20 years of experience from the early planning days on this project to the team. Some of you may know that I'm now Ridgeville, Washington's Public Works Director. And as such, I'm stepping away from this team. It's kind of mixed emotions on my part. This is my last official meeting as an OTAC employee, and I wanted to come say my farewells. I have told Kevin and Mike that I'm happy to help out behind the scenes, whatever I can do after. I want to make sure this project is a success, but I just wanted to stop by and say my goodbyes or farewells. I'm sure I'll be hoping to see the ribbon cutting in just a few years, walking across the new bridge.
That's the spirit.
I just wanted to just say farewell, and I'll be seeing you around.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your work.
Mike?
Hey, Chuck, just an acknowledgement to you. You and I first met when I first got involved in the bridge back in something like late 2017. It was you, Kevin, and I having a beer down around the corner, talking about this project, and I really appreciate everything that you've done over these past several years to try and get this project advanced. You have made a difference, and I personally wish you nothing but the best on your next assignment.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. That just means so much to me, and I do remember those days. I think it was Kareem or somewhere where we were kind of charting a path to getting the sense of urgency to getting this project moving. And I appreciate those meetings. I still remember them.
I'm confused. I thought that Mike Fox was involved in the first bridge.
No, he obviously was not.
Hey, Arthur, do you read hand signals?
Be careful there. This is being recorded.
And then, so OTAC is bringing in Scott Nettleton. He's gonna replace Chuck on their team, to help with some of these bridge background, structural background, as well as project. So we coming in to help the team.
Yeah, just briefly, I've been with Chuck since, since day one, he started working, got going, I was the one that, actually, I kind of pushed him out the door, and got going, more or less, I'd say, or helped him. So, then I do have some history with the structure. I was part of the team that worked on the TSNL report back in 2006. I did both the layout of the main span and the structure, which hopefully ended up pretty much the architecture and bridge we have today. So I look forward to actually seeing that finished up too, so. Thank you.
Well,
All right. Carl, I'm gonna turn it over to your team and we can get into the TNR.
Okay, I appreciate that. So should I go ahead and share my screen? That'd be the easiest way to do this. You can go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Well, right now I'm not able to share my screen. Is there?
Should be.
Okay. There we go. And just get this set up in a moment. I'll switch us to presentation mode. Get you a full picture. Do you see the large screen or two little small ones?
The presentation mode, we're seeing the two small ones.
Okay, I'll flip this in a moment. Okay, you should be seeing the full one now, right?
Yeah. we're
Great.
good.
Okay. Well, thank you again to each of you for inviting us today to speak about the Washington State Transportation Commission's Hood River Bridge Traffic and Revenue Study. Today, first I'm Carl C., the Deputy Director at the Commission and the lead for the Commission for the study. Joining us today, we have Tim Bosch with CM Smith, as well as Lowell Clary with Clary Consulting, who are on our consulting team for this project. And so together we'll be updating you on the current status of this study and some next steps. I can speak to that here on the next slide. So as I say, we provide you an update on the current status of the traffic and revenue study, following up on prior discussions with you on the preliminary tolling scenarios, for example. And today we do have initial results from the preliminary tolling scenarios, as well as some points, some considerations, some draft considerations around how we can approach getting to 2 final tolling scenarios with our commission over the next month or month and a half. In addition, if there is time, we have slides to share with you regarding the passenger car and freight shipper carrier surveys that we did at the end of last year. We know that it was a public facing part of our project, and that you would have interest in learning more about those results. But we want to be sure we also have sufficient time to go through each of these items. So if not today, then maybe the next meeting we're at, we could certainly be willing to share that with you as well. And finally, we'll just touch on our next steps and work plan update for the study. So just to bring us back to what the purpose of this study was, I think as Michael was sharing earlier, this was directed by the Washington State Legislature in 2022, primarily the idea of the House Transportation Chair to move forward a traffic and revenue study to be conducted by the Transportation Commission for this Hood River Bridge replacement project. This is a planning level study that will support identifying funding capacity for tolling on this future replacement bridge. And it will also address or prepare the entity, be it Bi-State Working Group or the Bi-State Authority, for moving forward with a potential investment grade study, traffic and revenue study in support of future financing. So with that background set, I'll just get to the preliminary tolling scenarios and start with our process. Again, this is a recap, but we started our scenario development actually back in late last year, I believe probably could say about November, and we developed 8 preliminary scenarios that the commission reviewed and then in December of 2022 and approved in January of 2022. We worked closely with your staff and consulting team to ensure that the elements, particularly on the pre-completion tolling on the current bridge, line up with how the Bi-State Working Group plans to move forward, knowing that that's still a work in progress as well. So you'll see some of those options here soon. Today, we're sharing with you the preliminary results that came from the forecasting work done by our consulting team over the past month and a half. And then in the March Commission meeting, we will first have a review of very similar presentations you'll see today, actually reviewing the results of the preliminary scenarios and having that initial discussion regarding the final 2 scenarios. This will be preceded actually tomorrow by a meeting of our tolling subcommittee, 3 commissioners that really just have a focus on tolling for our commission. They'll be reviewing this presentation tomorrow first to provide some recommendations perhaps to the full commission next week. We intend to finalize which 2 scenarios to move forward with at our April commission meeting, which will be April 14th and 15th. So there is some time there if there's some additional tweaks or understandings to come to ahead of the April meeting for us to finalize during that time frame. That will finally result in final scenario forecast analysis and modeling and any additional sensitivity tests that we'd be interested in doing. I think last time we were here, we touched on the frequency, a frequency program or a low income program, for example, assessing the impacts of such programs on revenues and traffic perhaps. And we would do those in the form of a sensitivity test on those final scenarios. And the whole report is then due by the end of June to the state legislature. So as a quick review, the tolling structure, the tolling scenario structure for the pre-completion and post-completion. So I should say the tolling scenario structure for the preliminary scenarios we kind of broke out into two categories. And you'll see this on the table that we'll share here in a moment. The pre-completion tolling, so tolling on the current bridge, assumed 4 completion scenarios, including a no change scenario. We assumed a rate increase starting as soon as July 1, 2023. And we assume that the current payment types for cash and credit and for breeze buy remain. For post-completion, so tolling on the replacement bridge, we proposed 2 escalation scenarios for each of those 4 pre-completion scenarios. Therefore, bringing us to 8 total scenarios to take a look at. We assume that rate increases for the new bridge could start as soon as July 1, 2030. We also assume that all payments would be electronic on the new bridge. And then finally, we included a $1 surcharge for video rates compared to the current surcharges for the cash credit toll rate, except for in scenario 2, which will apply to a $2 surcharge versus the freeze by rate. We'll touch on that a little bit more here in a moment. Continuing that, some assumptions we had on these tolling scenarios, we assumed the current toll axle multipliers remained unchanged throughout the analysis, so on the post-completion tolling as well. And we also maintain the existing toll-free exemptions and agreements that are in place currently, such as for tribal and for transit. We had also ruled out considerations regarding time of day of week, or seasonal pricing. And then, as we had noted before, we will consider some low-income or high-frequency discount plans as we do some final analysis on these scenarios, on the final 2 scenarios. So I'll go over this table and then hand off to Tim to start talking through some further analysis work. Again, you can spend some time if you have questions on this, but what I want to do is primarily review it and point out one difference from the last time you saw it. But this is effectively the same table you saw when we came before you, I believe it was in January. What it lays out are the 8 total scenarios that we put forward as preliminary tolling scenarios for the commission, which included the 4 pre-completion options that were under consideration that we had vetted with your commission staff and with the bicycle working group staff and consulting team as possible options for moving forward. That included no change, which I'll recognize is not really an option that's on the table, but wanted to have that as a placeholder. A 100% increase in FY 2024, so effectively doubling rates over current rates. And then the scenario 3 options, a 25% annual increase for both cash and credit and breeze buy through FY 27 before leveling out. And then finally, a 50% annual increase for cash and credit, and then a 25% rate increase for breeze buy through FY 30. So the most aggressive rate increases. For post completion, as I noted, we have 2 escalation options applied to each of these: 2.5% annual increase or a 15% increase every 5 years, starting in either FY 31, or if there had been an increase rather soon before FY 31, we push that off to FY 36. You see that being applied in scenario 2B, 3B, and 4B. One change from last time that we shared this with you is on scenario 2A and 2B. You'll note there that the differential between the breeze by rate and the video rate stays at $2, even as the breeze by rate increases through FY 51. That is consistent with how we apply how we handle transponder and video rates in Washington State, where we maintain the differential at a set amount. As opposed to what we see here on the other options, where both the freeze-by and the video rates are escalating at that 2.5 annually or 15% every 5 years.
Hey,
And
Carl,
we-
before you switch off this slide, just
Yep.
see if, and Carrie, is there, I know these scenarios are slightly different than what we call scenarios. Do you need any relationship between the two, or do you remember what they were?
I'm just assuming they're different and he's gonna explain where they go and, you know.
Okay,
which-
some of them are the
Two different
same,
things,
like the scenario 2 here is the same as scenario 4 that we were looking at, so. I just didn't want there to be confusion as the scenarios are a little different, so.
And I don't have a slide that does that crosswalk, so if there's staff who want to help kind of do that, that's great. I will say, we did have a conversation with staff, with I working group, staff and consultants last week. And I understand there is continued work to narrow down some pre-completion or revise some pre-completion options. And we definitely welcome that feedback, really seeking that feedback to see on the pre-completion side, are any of what we put forward really off the table at this point? And would there be other options for us to incorporate instead? That would reflect where your group is going in consideration of a rate increase coming up. And I understand perhaps your timing of that rate increase is possibly shifting, but whatever that might be, that kind of feedback would be welcome, whether it's today or in the coming days, so we can really put that forward as our most current understanding for our commission as well.
So I had questions about the assumptions that you started with. Would it be appropriate to wait until you're coming back to us for comments later, right?
You know, we can do that now, or we can show you where we're at and what this results in, and do questions. If you have a question on the assumptions, maybe we do that now. Just
No, I'll wait. I think it
on
makes
it.
more sense. I'll understand
Yes,
it better by then. Thanks.
Okay. So these are the options we analyzed for preliminary. As we look ahead to, and we'll get to that analysis here in a moment. As we look ahead, though, I'll just flag this for everybody. When we look for the two final scenarios, they don't need to reflect any of these individual 8 scenarios necessarily. They could differ from anything you see here, based on, and that could be because of changes in the pre-completion assumptions that are being put forward now, or preferences that are being put forward now, as well as resulting from any the analysis around, say, the financial capacity that came from this analysis. So I'll have a slide later in the presentation here that will speak to some considerations for the final 2. I just want to be sure that's clear, that when you see this, don't necessarily come away from it saying, well, thinking we need to choose 2 of these to move forward. There's you have the flexibility to make adjustments for the final 2. With that, I think I'll pass to Tim. We'll start with a couple slides that really just better reflect this in a visual way, and then Tim can move to the preliminary results.
Thank you, Carl. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. As Carl explained the toll rates, I thought it would be useful to look at them from a time series perspective in a graphic. And here you have in reds the scenario 1, scenario 2 is the gold, which kind of disappears behind scenario 3, and then scenario 4 toll rates. And for me, looking at this is easier because then you can see the consistency of the A increases versus the B increases, which are that sawtooth every 5-year type approach. And then it gives us that pre-completion notion of the 1A stays, the freeze-by rate stay at $1, while the other ones start to increase and then level off as we reach 2031, and then have the more just sort of growth-based growth throughout the timeframe period. Now, using the same scale, if we go forward one slide here, if you can advance one, Carl. Yep. Thanks. So this is the cash credit card rates prior to completion and the assumed video toll rates starting in 2031. And you can see, of course, they're significantly higher. They for one, obviously they stay at $2 until we hit that 2031 boundary, but the other ones increase significantly. And this is where you can see that difference in the scenario 2 is that the commission members requested that the difference not escalate as much, but instead be a constant $2. So that's why you can see that the gold line is not increasing quite as fast as that for 1, 3, and 4. So if there's any particular questions on these two graphs. All right. So we're going to talk about the preliminary scenario forecast work. Just as a little bit of a preamble, this work was based on quite a bit of new data analysis and modeling. So as you've heard in the past, this includes things like an independent economic forecast for the region and locally. It includes the state of preference survey to look at the value of time of actual users of the bridge. It includes updated traffic information, not only from the current bridge, but as well as the other nearby competing bridges and facilities. It also includes building of a what we call a travel demand model or a toll-based travel demand model that includes information, not only the value of time, but the vehicle operating costs. So if you think about it, if you're doing a relatively short trip in the area using the bridge, using one of the other bridges would cost a significant amount of money to drive over there. So that's an important factor. And then tolling is, the toll rates are also taken into consideration. All right, so let's look at the results. So this is the transaction information for all 8 scenarios, basically. As you can see, it doesn't vary, much at all. And I've compared that with some of the actual information we have for the first few years before the current year. The reason for this is that the service area, as you all know, is very tight for the bridge. For most people, they're not going quite far distances, so most of the trips are local, and so the toll rates don't have an enormous impact on transactions, but they do have some impact on transactions over time. The socioeconomic growth is basically what drives the increases going forward, except for the 2031 jump. We're assuming that with the new bridge, with a higher speed limit and safety features and everything that some of the things you guys talked about today, there will be an increase when the new bridge opens.
So Tim?
Yep.
If you go back that one. So what this tells me is that from 2030 and beyond, the accuracy of the data basically says they're all the same.
In terms of the transactions, yeah.
Right. So the tolling differences in the 8 scenarios really don't significantly drive a change in the use of the bridge.
That's correct.
Okay.
Why is there the big bump in 2029 in terms of annual transactions?
Talking about the one from 2030 to 2031.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for we're assuming the new bridge is open in 2031. And with the additional capacity of the bridge, we're assuming that's actually going to draw some from the other market in the area, if you will. There are some people that are probably avoiding the bridge at this point.
So it sort of seems to me that dotted green line should be one click left. Like the bridge opens and the use goes up, right?
It depends how you're graphing it in Excel, to be honest with you.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
End of period.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yep.
Yeah, it's end of period. You're right.
But there's no indication that the traffic will increase before the bridge opens, which this graph shows, just saying.
Well, this shows just some generic growth. The bridge has shown growth prior to the last few years.
I'm sorry, I mean the dramatic growth that you're referring to.
Yeah, no, there's no dramatic growth before
It's
that.
individual points which Excel has connected.
Yep,
which
and
shouldn't
now
be-
I understand. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's actually a vertical line.
Right, exactly.
Okay, any more questions on that one, or should I move it ahead?
A quick question, assuming that all the lines after 2030 are the same, that assumes our demand is inelastic, correct?
Essentially, yes.
And-
There is some effect by the tolling in terms of what I would call trip reduction or suppression, but we didn't find it to be a major factor when we did the survey itself.
The way this looks is the accuracy of the model kind of indicates that everything is within rounding, and you can't really make a strong judgment that at this particular rate, you're going to have a big fall off.
Well, I
don't
mean,
read it that way.
From what I'm looking at, it's trending down or flat, and by 2031, we're gonna add 1 million more trips. And where did we get that assumption? If we look back 8 or 10 years ago, were we only at 3 million trips per year? How are we assuming that there's 1 million more trips per year?
So the growth from 2002 to 2019 was about 2.3% annually. And of course, that included a couple toll increases. The growth more recently from 2011 to 2019 was 2.5%. And I think the toll rate increase was 2018. So you're doing fairly well. And the economics are indicating that it's possible in the next few years to have that kind of growth. There's probably also some COVID recovery that you're going to see.
What was the 2002 number, just for reference, or whatever the first numbers you have?
The 2002 to 2019 growth was 2.3%.
No, but what was the number of transactions in 2002?
Oh, you're okay.
Or whatever you have is whatever, just to demonstrate, because numbers I've seen, it really has, the bridge traffic today is significantly more than it was in 2000.
What I have is 3 million for 2002.
Okay.
And 2011, about 3.6. And then 2019, about 4.4.
Right. So that's good.
Okay.
That's a pretty, yeah,
That's
they just
2.5%.
used to chart it to start the graph. On the downslope,
On the
it's really, that was COVID interrupting steep upslope.
Got it.
Yep. When we get to other presentations, like when you guys start looking at financing stuff, we would extend that.
Hey, Tim, another question for you.
Sure, Mike.
We brought up, if you look at 2030 to 2060, you're going from 5.8 million transactions up to 7.8. At 7.8, did you guys look at all? Is a 2-lane road structure sufficient?
That's a good question. I suspect you're fine. But our modeler didn't say anything in particular about it. Your daily numbers, I'm trying to remember, you don't happen to have that handy, do you? What our daily looks like. Well, we'll get some information on that, but your daily numbers, I want to say, are in the 10K. It shouldn't be a problem at 20.
At 20, okay.
Yeah.
Should I move us ahead?
Yep.
Yeah, let's take a look at the next one. So this graph shows us gross toll revenue. So this is what we would call expected revenue. If every vehicle crossing the bridge handed you the money they're supposed to hand you, this is the revenue we're looking at. And again, you can kind of see the A scenarios versus the sawtooth nature of the B scenarios. Scenario 1, which is basically current rates with some escalation after 2031, doesn't increase the revenue very much. You can see we're reaching up to about 20 million by the end of the forecast period in terms of the gross. Scenarios 2 and 3 push up quite a bit more, getting us up to the $36 to $38 million range. And of course, scenario 4 pulls all the way up above the $50 million range. And the increases in the early years, pre-completion just basically follow the toll rates.
Is this in today's dollars?
Yeah. I'm sorry, they're nominal, the year of collection dollars, my apology.
So inflation. These are not inflation adjusted, is that how we say that?
Correct.
You don't know what inflation will be.
Well, your
The toll rates are increased.
toll is inflated.
Yep.
At either 2.5% or 15% every 5 years. So at the opening of the new bridge in, say, 2030, am I reading this correctly, that scenario 2, which is $1 increase on the breeze by for cars, this gets applied to all of the equipment going across the bridge, not just cars, right? This is total annual gross, everything all in. It says that you would reserve something like 14 million. If we're looking at the yellow line.
You're talking about where we are with the gross?
Yeah, what I'm looking at is how much reserves would we generate by the
That's what
time
you're
the
saying.
bridge opens using scenario 2?
I think we'd have to ask Carrie and Lowell to opine on that, but yeah, that would be the difference that you're talking about.
So that number at 2030 looks to be about, I don't know, 14 million.
But the reserves
Yeah,
needed,
Just to be clear, Commissioner,
These are annual.
the HNTB team and the port staff are doing the analysis of the pre-completion tolling.
Oh, I
For the most
understand.
part, so this graph here is not set up to actually estimate that. Although we do have numbers for that exact scenario, because that's the same as one of our scenarios.
Yeah, and that's why, if I remember right, on our scenario, Carrie, $1 increase would generate something higher than the 14 million.
I'm gonna see if I can find that right now.
And I'm just wondering, do we have a difference of calculation here? And if we're trying to figure out, if we're shooting for $21 million reserve by the time the bridge opens, to be able to attract a TIFIA loan and to be able to have an operational reserve in place on that first year, are we okay with our model?
There's another thing to be aware of, and that is, and I think we get closer to the answer to your question, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Right now, this chart is gross toll revenues.
Yeah.
And so when we are talking in our groups about pre-completion tolling, we're talking net toll revenues. That is, this does not account for operation and maintenance costs, reserve and replacement costs, and cost of collection for the tolls.
Yeah,
and
but
it's
we're
also a
looking-
cumulative graph. This is not a cumulative graph.
Correct.
It's fine. No.
Yeah, we're not apples and apples yet.
But these are cumulative curves.
No, they're not.
No,
It's annual.
no, this is annual.
Okay, never mind.
No, I get your point. You have to integrate into the curve.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, actually, this looks pretty good then.
Yes, exactly. No, that's why I was surprised that you were worried about this.
Well, we're not done yet. Let's get
Not-
through the rest of the pieces.
Should we use that chance here to go to the net toll revenue discussion? Because I think that might help get at some of these
Sure.
questions.
Okay, next slide. So in our gross to net toll revenue projections, we were trying to be as comprehensive as we could to understand what the costs would be. So in terms of the toll collection costs, we looked at things like transactions processing, the cost for toll collectors pre-completion, support personnel for the authority, because won't be anybody that's like new for you guys. There'll be a roadway and back office system, and that will need operations and maintenance as well as repair and replacement on like a 10-year cycle. The cost of transponders and mailing them as people are new ones, and then making the statements out and sending those out. We also included credit card fees, which any of you who work in any kind of business know that those can be pretty steep. And then because we're assuming an all electronic facility, electronic toll facility, similar to what WashDOT operates on the 520, we're assuming a video leakage of 50%. So if you are collecting a video plate, about 50 to 55% of those will get paid. So we're using 50% as a conservative, slightly conservative assumption at this point. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So what we did is we took all of that information and we kind of added it all together so you could see what those costs look like. Now, in the early years, this is an estimate by us. It's not necessarily based on all the work that Carrie's doing and the port with the new finance director working on. So it's possible that the cost of collection pre-completion could actually be lower. We did it based on our basic model. And then the post-completion, you'll notice that there's the 10-year bumps in the replacement for the toll system. So that's R&R. And then the standard operating costs. And those, the reason that the cost itself generally goes up has to do with that video leakage. A lot of the rest of the costs are fairly flat. All right, so then we subtract that off. Oh, go ahead.
Hold on a second. So
Sure.
I want to make sure that, let's say in 2031,
Mhm.
the blue line says $9 million. Okay, what is that $9 million again? What's in it?
So that's the, hold on a second. I actually have an Excel chart too on my end that I'm looking at, so I can get you those numbers. It's about 2031.
Yeah,
Okay, so your gross revenue for scenario 4B, let's say, is about 21 million. And then your toll cost is about 5.5 million with about 3 million of video leakage. So your net revenue is around 12 million.
but that doesn't include costs associated with paying back TIFIA loans and.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Okay, so
Yep.
this is only collecting costs on the
Yep.
tolls.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Kevin, that's nowhere near what we're paying now, is it?
I don't think so.
Okay,
Although,
it's- Good.
this is Debbie, I did want to jump in there and say, I think that also includes the first year of getting the tolling, the software update, because you have that big jump. And then you don't have another big jump for 10 years. So that's that initial cost of getting the tolling system upgraded. And it will actually be due for that about that time. So that is probably pretty accurate as far as timing of the tolling software update.
how much would that point cost be, Debbie, roughly?
You mean to upgrade the tolling system?
Yeah, and not have toll collectors, but move them into the back office.
So I'd have to get all those numbers pulled together. I don't have all those off the top of my head. The tolling increase, the software is probably, and I'm really throwing out wild numbers here because I haven't gotten the numbers because we're doing an upgrade this year.
Right.
And so, I mean, we're looking at several $100,000 to upgrade the software this year. And P Square is supposed to get us the more accurate numbers in time for our budget in this upcoming budget. The cost of the toll collectors and everything associated with toll collecting is running us somewhere around $2 million right now.
That's what I kind of assume, between $2.5 million. And that's just toll collection and administrative costs for that. Doesn't include maintenance of the bridge.
That's correct.
So we're gonna go from, give it $2.5 million to $8 million.
Where you.
And that
see-
$8 million, let's say you take it up instead of 300,000, take the $2.5 million to $3.5 million. That's still like $5 million increase.
That's not what that's showing.
Blue graph, 2030.
I'm looking at the blue graph.
So what they're doing, Mike, they're including in there the cost to collect the toll, the video leakage.
Yeah,
And that's what's changing that number so much, because you don't have the leakage currently. So in essence, it's an opportunity cost or not.
yep, okay. I just look at this and I'm going, wow. There's gotta be some opportunity in there.
And part of that, the 4A, of course, is the highest toll rates proposed. And so you see that with the leakage rates at the highest amount, you're losing the most, of course, right? So.
Commissioner, it's, Carl, it's also including the personnel costs for the new entity.
Okay, so for the new.
So there are extra costs in there, Commissioner, that you would not see under the current scenario.
Like, give me an example, please.
Executive director, what other staff you need for the new entity. Those personnel costs and other costs would be included.
Okay.
Whereas now that's part of the overall port.
Right. Okay, I understand.
I'm sympathetic to Mike Fox's point that including video leakage as a cost instead of a reduction in revenue is not the only way I can imagine thinking of that. So I'm working to like say, oh, it's a cost. No, it's not. It's a loss of revenue, but okay.
Yeah.
Sure. That's fair.
Okay, thank you.
To be honest with you, we have that discussion internally too.
There you go.
We're like, well, should that be a cost? All right, so yeah. There are ways to improve that, and discussing with our experts. Well-tuned systems that are well-maintained, you can get better. And then there's how well do you set up your business rules for collecting that? So there's various ways to offset it.
And if we're sharing our final two scenarios, that we can keep in mind, perhaps showing that broken out more, when we're just down to two scenarios instead of 8, give us more chance to zoom in on that perhaps.
Between.
Okay.
Photos.
Okay.
We go to the annual net toll revenue.
Yeah, let's go next.
Mhm.
So if we take the gross revenue and we take out basically the toll collection cost, which includes replacing the system over the years, the toll collection system, and then the assumed video leakage. This is what remains to pay for the debt service as well as the facility operations maintenance R&R. So that's the bridge itself, the physical bridge. And then of course, if any discount programs are applied. So in the early years, in the scenario 1, you can see that we're hovering pretty low. It's possible that those numbers are a little higher in the pre-completion years because the collection costs could be cheaper. But we see that only gets up into the 7 or 8 million in the outer years, whereas you go all the way up to scenario 4, and we're up above, we're up around 35,000. So these are the basic numbers that then start feeding into the capacity analysis.
I mean, 35 million,
Yes.
Yeah, for scenario 4.
right?
And the reason you see all this jaggedness is the toll rate jaggedness, in addition with the toll system replacement jaggedness, starts making these things move around quite a bit. Okay. And next slide, please.
Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
I think there's a super interesting assumption that I wasn't aware of, and maybe you all have talked about it prior, which is, it appears to me that the last day I drive over the old bridge, like the last day, and then the next day I drive over the new bridge, it's the same price, isn't it?
It's the same price.
Correct. Isn't that true?
Depends on the
Yes.
scenario.
you're talking about the toll rate that you pay?
Yes.
I reach out the window and pay my last Old Bridge, and then I video or, on the, I would have guessed that we would have like a double on that day, but that does not seem to be the plan.
It depends on the scenario, obviously, but there's a dollar increase between the cash rates that you would pay and the video rate in two of the assumptions, or three of the scenarios, and then in one of the scenarios, it's a $2 increase.
Could you go back to, hold this slide, but go back to 8 so we can look at the rate table.
Sure.
Slide 8.
Hold on, there it is.
Yes, this is the right slide for that.
So in scenario 2, the answer is yes, it'd be the same price.
And scenario 1. For Breeze By.
For Breeze By, right.
And scenario 3.
For Breeze By though.
Well,
It was one of the.
And scenario 4. All of these are true for Breeze By.
But
And I have my little sticker.
that was one of the arguments that Carrie was making before, though, is that in order to, for the creditworthiness, that we need to demonstrate the ability to collect that toll. So the goal is to,
Keep it low.
to get the toll to the cost that is necessary to drive the new bridge.
Bring the old up
For
to
the
the
new
new.
bridge, right, exactly, and that helps us with creditworthiness.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm speaking for you, Carrie, but that's the way I recall you describing it.
And I believe you, but it just seems to me as like a person, I'm driving on the ka-chunk bridge, and then I'm driving on the Zoomer bridge for the same price. That surprises me.
So that is strictly 100% a policy call on the part of the new Bi-State Bridge Authority. They could decide that on day one, they are going to have a higher toll rate. There may be double the tolls that people were paying on the old bridge. That is 100% policy. Now, what we're talking about though is the need to raise some tolls in the very near future in order to build these reserves. That is not to say that you couldn't also then have a toll rate on day one of the new bridge. Absolutely, and we could model that. This assumes that we do all the toll increases ahead of time so that on the day that you change over from old bridge to new bridge, the toll rates stay the same. But that is strictly a policy matter.
Got it.
I
Thank you.
thought our scenario 3 and 5, Carrie, did have a bump up in right after we opened the new bridge.
Right.
Yeah, the confusing thing here is these scenarios 1 through 4 that we're looking at
Yep.
do not correspond to the other. And we're going to work on trying to synchronize those a little bit to make this easier to understand.
But
And,
these are-
and, but if I look at, correct me if I'm wrong, Carrie, wasn't scenario 3, was it $1.75 in, going to $1.75 on Breeze By for cars?
Our scenario 3,
Yeah,
boy, I'm going to have to.
because both 3 and 5 got us roughly where we needed to get to for the reserves.
5 was $1. $1 was 5.
Dollar increase.
And our scenario 4, is the same as their scenario 2.
2. Yes.
Okay, so what is our scenario 3?
75 auto,
$1.75.
$1.50 cash.
Yeah, so it was $1.75 for Breeze By. for
Yeah.
cars?
And 24, it's $1.75 for cars.
Okay,
Scenario three.
and then what was 5?
$2.
Okay. Okay, that's right, because 5, we rounded everything to a dollar.
$1. Yep.
Okay. But 3 or 5 got us pretty close to where we thought we needed to be.
Correct.
And then it was a 2.5% increase on opening.
We didn't have a set the increase, we didn't get to what the increase would be at opening. We were stopping when we got to opening.
Okay,
Our analysis was all pre-opening.
okay.
Because we don't have a lot of information on what the cost of operating the new bridge is,
Right, and they,
which is what they worked
they
on.
have, yeah.
Right.
Their focus is more there on out.
We didn't even
Ours was more in the beginning.
we didn't even discuss the term leakage.
Correct.
I would have noticed that came up in discussion.
Correct,
Yeah.
yes.
So I guess, would it make more sense to make that leakage not be a cost? You just subtract that off the revenue side, you know, for what you're anticipating? Because we're under the impression that it's gonna be 50%, but we only have 20% of our users that actually pay cash current.
It's the leakage is on your electronic.
Right, and that's gonna be on it, so it's hard to believe that.
Our current leakage is 60%.
It's about, yeah. But our current, but also I did want, and we were kind of discussing this over on the side. I also wanted to point out that currently we only use video for people that we consider drive-throughs, we call them, the people that don't stop and the people that intend to run through. So our collection rate, I think, is probably lower than it would be if it was just a consistent tolling policy that people could just drive through. Because right now it's just people that are intending not to stop that we have video for. Violators, yes.
But all of this is just, these are models and they're supposed to help us, you know, they're attempting to be somewhat conservative and to give us some feeling for what our ability is to generate revenue, but none of this is constraining to the policies that the tolling authority is going to, you know, start to implement and get some experience and make adjustments based on that.
So is there a slide on here on how much bonding, how much we could
Yes.
bond?
There is.
Shall we
That's
look?
coming up next.
So go back to it. I will make one comment that others in your position have been through this where they're replacing a bridge. And if some of you know about the process for developing the toll rates on the SR 520 bridge, there was a committee that went around and discussed with people in the area about, well, do we put this all off until the new bridge is in place, or do we do some pre-completion to help fund stuff? And so they did do pre-completion tolling, even though it wasn't a toll bridge to begin with. And then there was a significant jump on opening day. So that's something that could be considered if it's useful for the financial approach.
The other way to look at it is that gives you the flex, if you don't plan for that initially, it gives you the flexibility to have a jump. Potentially if financials made that necessary down the road, knowing that projects can have overruns and whatnot, and perhaps that gives you that financial capacity to do that at a later date.
You know, the history has been roughly 5 years and we do a bump. So if we did a bump this year, by the time the new bridge is open, it's time for its first bump. But to me, I don't think we want that bump to be horrendous, but just kind of a natural progression, getting yourself lined up for every 5 years, or if people decide it's every year, it's 2.5% or keep it down.
Somewhere between 0 and horrendous, I recommend.
Yeah.
Good policy.
If I might, as we get into the next little portion of this, I think what you're going to see is that, you know, there again, we're doing two parallel calculations. One is funding capacity, and one is building these reserves. And the toll rates that will give you the necessary reserves on opening day of the new bridge may not support, and I think you're going to see that as we go forward. I don't want to steal any thunder, but may not support the financing that you're ultimately going to need. And one way to approach that is to do what you need to do today to build the reserves, and do what you need to do when the bridge opens to be able to obtain the financing that you need.
Right, and the reality is we don't even know what financing we need because we don't know what grants we're getting. So lots of unknowns and we're gonna have to work with it.
But you know, you're only gonna get grants to match the need.
Well,
If I was a state legislator, I'd be like, oh, sure looks like you can do 200 million. Now I know how much I can give you.
well, that's dependent on what you consider reasonable toll.
Right.
Right.
Moving on.
Should I move to our description here? There we go. Lowell's gonna take this from here.
Good afternoon. A couple of points. We do not, in response to Commissioner Fox and also in talking to HNTV, consider any need of revenues in the pre-completion period. So we did not assume any of that. We do cover all operations and maintenance cost, all renewal and replacement cost in the financial model. You do have to have what we call coverage of net revenues to do either a TIFIA loan or bonding, which consumes part of your revenue stream. Interest rates are driven by key factors, and I want to caution these do change every day. So if they go up, you're going to lose capacity. If they go down, you're going to gain capacity. So we assumed a TIFIA loan. We also assumed a BBB rated bond. BBB is considered the minimum investment grade, which for a new entity like this, with your structure and no current bond rating, is probably where you would start. The debt structure, TIFIA is a little more flexible. It's like a bank line of credit, so you don't pay any interest until you use the funds, which is very helpful. We assumed no payments during construction, and the debt service can ramp up on TIFIA. It's more flexible and then level for 25 years. Bonds, we assume capitalized interest, no payments during construction, and then payments for 27 years. Next slide. So in essence, this is showing you the different scenarios. You'll notice under one, there's essentially no capacity. So if you do no increase today and just normal 2.5% or 15% every 5 years, you do not generate any capacity. In the increase areas, 2A, 2B are similar. 3A, 3B are also similar, slightly different on TIFIA. And the largest increase is 4, which generates more capacity. And as you can see, TIFIA does generate more capacity because it has more flexibility on the front end, as far as not requiring interest payments from day one, but until you use the funds, and also a lower interest rate during the term. The next slide will show you a comparison of revenue to, this is essentially net revenue after cost. And the big drop out there is Kerry gave us a renewal and replacement cost for the new bridge. And there are some big renewal and replacement costs in those outer years to keep the bridge up, which you would expect. But you can see essentially what that coverage looks like over the debt payments. And it does allow a little higher payment from TIFIA compared to bonds. And I want to caution, this is a very, very quick preliminary analysis of 8 scenarios. When we get down to the 2 scenarios, we can be a lot more focused, both on the cost side as well as the scenarios related to the debt side, and provide more succinctness on this at that point in time. Any questions we can answer for you?
Just to make sure I'm reading this correctly. So one thing this is showing is that the TIFIA loan is less expensive to us than a toll bond. Yes.
That's correct.
Okay. Just making sure.
At the current rates, that is correct. Now, bond rates are higher than TIFIA now. There are certain periods in the past they've been much closer. That's something that your financial advisors will monitor very closely, and they'll advise you on that as you get closer to that point in time. The other thing is TIFIA does limit typically to 1/3 of the cost, which in your case, that would not be a problem because you're going to be having grants cover more than 2/3 of this, more than likely. So you should be fine to use TIFIA for the debt portion. if you choose to.
Just to call it out, this is just an example effectively, right, Lowell, of how
Right.
this looks for scenario 3A.
Yeah, this is 3A, just as an example. So this is the increase that would occur over a period of time in the early period, and then 2.5 or 15%. Or in this case, it would be 2.5% every year.
But 3A was $1.25 from $1.
You want to go back to that one, Carl?
I just need to know.
Yeah, 3A goes to $1.25 this year, and then to
Yes.
$2 for fiscal year 30. So that's for the breeze buy, and $3 for the cash credit card.
Do you have a scenario curve for 2?
We can generate it. We don't have it right now.
Okay.
Right.
We didn't want to overwhelm you with graphs today. If you tell us which
Intuitively,
one you
in
want,
terms
we
of,
can
in
generate.
terms of capacity, I would expect 2 to look very similar to 3 because
Yes,
because they're both based on the total rates on in 2030. The only thing that would be different would be the pre-completion period. We would not generate as much reserves with
3.
3 as we
That's
do
right.
with 2. But in terms of financing capacity, I would expect them to be pretty similar.
Yeah, they are very similar.
Okay, so the way I read this curve, this is not a cumulative, this is incremental by year. So if I look at 2030 and earlier, since we don't really have any costs, that's all reserve. So we're running at about 1, 2, 3, 4 times 4, 16 plus another maybe 5. You should have at that 2030 mark, when we open the bridge, you should have something like 24, $23 million in green to start paying out.
No.
Okay, what's the bank account look like in 2030 as you start opening the bridge? We got to pay back the loan. We've got to operate the bridge. And if we go up in scenario 3A by $0.25 and then $2 at opening, how close to the edge are we that first year of not having sufficient funds?
Well, that probably gets to Carrie's analysis, right? To determine the size of your amount of reserve you can build up. I would note the bond without TIPIA, you're starting to make bond payments in 2027, is that right? Because you don't have the opportunity to delay it until 20.
Yeah, those early bond payments are what's called capitalized interest. It's essentially you borrow more money than you're going to use to pay a couple years of debt service. So you wouldn't be hitting your total revenue, in other words. But, and I'm sure Carrie can give you better numbers on this, but we're looking at about 4.8 million a year, 24 through 30.
So
Of what we call available funds.
This scenario.
Now that's under 2A.
This is the yes, under 2A, which is the immediate total increase, the immediate doubling of both cash and breeze buy. And you'll recall in our analysis that easily got us to our target of 15 million by 2028 and 21 million by 2029.
Right.
Easily.
And I know, Carrie, you've got some uses of that you're assuming, and we saw some R&R cost you had in that early period.
What assumptions we're making here is that this is a 25-year TIFIA loan for 75 million we could raise. if we made the assumption at a 30-year TIFIA loan, what would that do to our capacity?
No, it's
It's
actually
a 30.
it's a 35-year loan. There's 5 years of deferrals, there's 5 year of ramp up payments, and then 25-year of level payments.
So the 5 years of deferral, wouldn't that start in 2030?
No, you have to start when you start using the money. So you're gonna use the money while you're building the bridge.
Hopefully, we don't have to use the money until the last year of building the bridge.
That would be the
That
goal.
helps.
That would help. Now, we assumed it earlier just to be conservative. We assumed using the TIFIA money and the bond money earlier just to be more conservative. So if you can push it to the back end, that will help.
But your curve here shows that you're paying back in 2030. So you've assumed that we're gonna start using it in 2025?
Using what?
TIFIA money.
Dollars.
We're, I think, assuming in 2027 and 2028.
So if we really don't start using it until 29 and 30, or even if the last month.
You're gonna be able to borrow more money. You should be able to.
Yeah, the last money we want to use is TIFIA, and that'll be for the bridge removal. And
Just remember that it's all
20,
dependent on how much money we get from everywhere else. If we don't,
That's right.
we don't get enough state money or federal money, then TIFIA is gonna have to come in sooner.
And again, this is all a model. There's huge unknowns. We're putting much too fine an edge on things, I think.
Right.
Our assumptions in the analysis that we've done, Commissioner, assume that the first draw on the funds is in 2029.
Yeah. So I think in my feeling here, I would be uncomfortable with this curve and a capacity of 75 million. I think we got to have a discussion. Is 75 million enough? Do we feel comfortable with that, or do we need something higher than that? And if we do, what do we do with the curves?
Well, Commissioner, your comments certainly help us as we do the final scenarios, and we'll coordinate obviously with your staff. And if you want us to consider TIFIA later or bonds later, we can do that. So we can do essentially both as options, earlier and later, just to show you the difference.
Yeah, I personally think if we need 140 instead of 75, we're going to need the money earlier because the project blew out. If we need 75, I'm sorry.
That's not necessarily, I mean, it doesn't mean the project blew up. There's another end of that. If you don't get the state money or the federal money.
You're right.
you need more TIFIA money.
Or we could have started later. We could have had a delay that caused us to shift the whole thing forward and everything becomes more expensive
Well,
because of that.
You will also need more reserves if that's the case.
Yeah.
For a $140 million loan than you will for a $100 million loan or
Yeah, I
seven.
mean, there's a lot of moving parts with this.
Right.
So we don't have the data refined enough to get into even I'd say 10 million, $20 million changes on this thing. It's generally, think of it as plus or minus, right? These are not exact numbers. It's not, you do this, you're gonna get exactly this. It's, you're gonna get this, and generally you're gonna get somewhere in that range. Interest rates are gonna make a fairly decent difference within 5 or 10 million, so I think, that's what we have to remember, and I think also we have to remember that there's two pieces, right? There's getting enough reserve money, which is between now and opening in 30, and then there's full long-term capacity to pay back a loan, right? That we need to have, and that's where there's two pieces to this. What we've talked about up till now is just getting to the reserve. This is kind of showing us, well, what kind of a TIFIA loan and what payments can we make on that TIFIA going out the full length of term, right?
So I guess what we could say here is for moving forward, we were looking at our options, number 3 and number 5. And if we could get those incorporated into this as moving forward, because we're more aware that we need the money now and we need to make a big increase now. And that this one won't get us there, scenario 3A, because we don't save up enough money fast enough here.
That is correct.
And so my hope is that what you guys take forward next Tuesday to the Transportation Commission looks at our scenario 3 and scenario 5, which aren't too far off.
At least one of them.
But yeah, or at least make one of those. But then, no matter what, it's still gonna come out and show that we can raise about 75 million. And that in front of the Transportation Commission and the legislature lets them know that that's what we can come up with. And so then when they're looking at how much they want, they're gonna have to, subsidize us. If they're figuring 75 million is what the local match is gonna be, at least that's a good number.
I look at this and I think if we picked either 3 or 5 of our scenario, we've positioned the new board very well to go forward. What the new board decides to do with tolls on the new bridge, by positioning this way, they've got a lot more options. They can slow the curve down a bit. They could keep it wherever we have it, but they've got options. They don't have to raise it up so high that it goes vertical on us. So I'm pushing. I think we've got to build the reserve as quick as we can. It gives so much more flexibility later on. And if we did either 3 or 5, it looks very promising that $75 million loan would not be a big issue.
But that's a policy debate that we're gonna have to have. I completely, everything you stated is true. There are political considerations that we're going to have to weigh, and I think we have some disagreements among the group about that. So that's not for this discussion, really.
So how much are you guys putting aside on the repair and replacement aspect of this for your TIFIA capacity?
We took those numbers from your team.
We've
Okay,
provided
so-
numbers, Commissioner, that were provided to us and then vetted by our engineering team as well. But the original numbers were numbers for typical new construction, segmental concrete steel bridges with the number of piers that we have and the square footage of bridge deck that we're talking about. And then we got numbers from ODOT that actually probably have their origin more with FHWA. And then we fit them into the dimensions of our existing bridge. So it's an industry model for a 40-year life cycle on a bridge of the type that we're going to be constructing.
So your life cycle for replacement on the new bridge is 40 years?
Not necessarily, but we only looked out 40 years because that's all we have to be concerned with. We're not necessarily saying that at the end of 40 years, the bridge has no value and needs to be replaced. But there are for instance, there is a period, and I don't remember what it is, that might be what the big blip that we see at about year
It is
17 or 18, expansion joint replacements. There are some foundation inspections and possible repairs that have to get accounted for. And the other thing I will say about that line that shows that huge dip at year 17 or 18 in the life of the bridge, what we typically do is we typically establish a reserve and replacement fund that smooths that line out, right? In other words, we don't take huge hits one year and then have the big swings that we see. We typically, if we know an expense is coming up in 15 years, we typically save for that expense, then we spend that money, but we spend back down to that trend line so that you don't have these wild swings.
If I can interject, Carrie, it's Mary Franker from PFM, and TIFIA will require you to do that. They'll look to have you fund renewal and replacement reserves so that you don't have that volatility in your cash flow.
And we have it set up that way for SR 520, which is bonded and has TIFIA loans as well. So, yeah, definitely on standard practice. Well, this discussion feeds well into some considerations. We put together draft considerations around getting to 2 final toll scenarios. We could, if there's more discussion around this, we could do that. Otherwise, we could shift over to those some considerations that I would put forward tomorrow to our tolling subcommittee and eventually to our full commission the following week. And I think you'll see some of the points you've been talking through already. Should I go ahead and shift that? Yeah. So here, and again, this is before any discussion today, but partly informed by a discussion with staff and consultants last week. Draft considerations for final 2 scenarios. 1, funding and financing needs. So getting to the discussion that we've been having today, how can we best prepare for further analysis on and addressing the unknowns around future funding and financing? It seems fair to assume that you can get a TIFIA loan through this process, but then do we need to project how much funding do we target with the rate increases or with the rate scenarios? As you say, 75 million might be an amount, but would there be value in looking at one option that gets to 75 million with one of your pre-completion updated pre-completion approaches, and then another one that reaches a higher financial amount, be it the 140, for example, if just to show what's possible if people are willing to swallow toll rates at necessary levels. Or do we have 2 at 75 million that have different approaches to get there? I think that's a lot of discussion could be around that. The others are probably less important, but are still elements of consideration. Do we apply the escalation to video tolling like we did on the majority of the options, or do we assume the $2 differential that we have on scenarios 2A and 2B, in which we apply here in Washington State? Pre-completion toll rates, that is alignment with the discussion we've had today. As you've been putting forward the options 3 and 5 that your team is looking through, we can certainly take a look at applying one or both of those to scenarios going forward if that's where your team is and your commission, your working group is at. As we do want to be in alignment with what we could expect to see going forward on this pre-completion side, in particular, so we can have tolling scenarios that could be really useful, analysis that could be useful for taking this a step further with the next step in analysis, and as you discuss funding options. And finally, we can consider whether or not the escalation rates we propose should be maintained, or should one option say be at the 2.5 annually or 15% every 5 years, and perhaps one of the other tolling options having a higher escalation rate. The other option could be that one option that we apply a jump in that first year of tolling, perhaps on first year of operations for the new bridge. That we could have one scenario that has that jump and one scenario that does not. It'd be another way to consider raising more revenues with one option than the other. So those were some we thought of walking into this meeting. Now I'm sure if there's additional thoughts around how to approach that, that's great, but also welcome to discuss that now or come back and share how we progress with that.
So a suggestion, your number 3, which we just looked at on the green line, was a 25-cent increase. And that looked like it generated enough where we could support a $75 million TIFIA loan and create enough reserve that out there 20 or 30 years from now, we would be able to fund the major upgrade.
Yeah.
My personal opinion, I'd like to see that stay as one of the options. And then the other option, if we're only limited to 2, I would pick either 3 or 5. both get us kind of where we thought we needed to get. But I think that is a number, the hour 3 was a 75-cent increase instead of a 25% increase. I'd like to see and validate what would that generate? What would the curve look like? And could it potentially support a higher TIFIA loan? And by roughly how much?
Carl, can you go back to your scenario table? I'm a little bit concerned. Commissioner, when you said scenario 3 was a 25-cent increase, it's a 25-cent increase per year between now and 2030, where your toll rates end up at $2 and $3.
Yeah, it's not a 20, yeah.
Yes, it's not 20, it's 25 cents each year between now and 2030, starting July 1, actually, in this scenario, I think.
I should say between
I'm sorry.
20.
Between now and 2027.
That's how you get, yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
20, I was gonna say, because that doesn't add up to 2030.
No.
Right.
Because that
Just
would, it would
40.
be higher than that. So that doesn't make any sense. Or we're just topping it out in 27.
Right.
And then we just call it square.
But I think for that question 1 on the considerations, I'm reading it as shouldn't we be like solving backwards? So if we want to be considering financing up to 140, that's the goal. And you tell us where that increase needs to be. I'd prefer that exercise versus thinking about 25 cents or 75 cents. Like I want that exercise to show us.
Mhm.
Well, I think Lowell showed us that only one scenario comes anywhere close to 140, and that was the scenario that ends up at 275 and 550 by 2030.
That's true. 4A and 4B.
Right, but I think focus,
Where's
I
that
would
going?
prefer to focus, because you're trying to figure out for the final 2 scenarios, what our preference is, if we're wanting to see just a focus of a 75 million financing goal or a range, right?
I guess here's a couple things I would say to look at. One is scenario 2A and 2B is the same as our doubling scenario. That gives us an immediate increase of doubling tolls today, which we know gives us more revenue reserve than what we needed. Right, but it only long-term gets us to 75 million. Right, so that's 2A and 2B. So I think that's one that we should probably keep. Right, and then the other scenario would be something like a 4A and 4B, but you start with the doubling. And then you apply an increase. Well, that would be.
Something gets us to 140 million.
To get to 140, all right?
Yeah.
And what does that look like? What annual increase would it take to get from 2A, 2B in 2030 to 140 million TIFIA loan? And what was that, a 4.5% annual increase and 20% every 5 years, or what is that gets us there? Starting, you know what I'm saying, Carl, that makes sense?
I don't really think we'd want to take that as one of the options that we're contemplating is that,
Because you demonstrate it's possible.
you demonstrate the possibility that in 2030, people are going to want to pay $10 to go to Hood River and back, or $11.
No.
Well, I think
That
in the
would be-
demonstration, you're
that's not what
showing
it
that they
says.
cancel it out.
You would be paying, what I was saying was you would be paying in 2030, $4 and $2. But by the time you get to 51, you're gonna be probably higher than the $10 or $11 by 51.
Well,
Because your ramp up from 2030
Right.
to 2050 is gonna be bigger than where you're starting at here, because here in scenario 4A, to get to 140, you've got to be at 550 by the time the bridge opens.
and that,
Which we don't have to do, because we know that we can be the doubling and get the reserves that we need.
so I guess if I like to think of it a different way is that we're gonna take a TIFIA and we're shooting for 75, and that's one of the options that we should send to them. We can raise 75 and that's,
2A,
well, they said you could get 75 with option 3.
you could, yes. But
Okay.
I don't think with under 3A,
But so if we're looking at 30 being $2 and $3, we could get there with our option 5 by instituting that now. The difference is we're raising more money from now until then.
Yeah, the concern I have is that 3A and 3B will not give us the reserves that we need.
But if rather than 3A, we're using our 5,
It's.
Which
Yes,
is there to
you're correct, you're right, yeah.
no, there's a difference
There is a
because it's not a doubling. Our 5 is $1, which is $2, $3. It's just $1. It's something we could sell to the, because then we have to take this out and sell it. If you're going out there and you're trying to sell $8 to go across the bridge with cash,
Mhm.
that's gonna be, I think, a little tougher than saying $3 a trip. So it's just that option and which way we want to go.
Yeah, I think for the pre-completion, the two options would be the doubling and either scenario 3 or scenario 5. Because they basically gave you the same result.
Of our study, not this study.
Not this one, right? You're-
From our study, scenario 3 is equal to their scenario 2.
Oh,
Okay.
no, that's
Right.
not correct. Ours.
Oh, our scenario 4 is equal to their scenario
Oh, our
2.
scenario 4.
So
Okay.
you would go with their scenario 2, which is a doubling of tolls, and then either our scenario 3 or
Right.
our scenario 5, because they got us there to get the reserves. They were basically the same. It's whether you want to do a 75 cent or a $1 across the board. But the end result of the two were basically the same. And then
Mhm.
you would need to apply a post completion that gets you to 75 and one that gets you to some number more than 75. Whatever upper limit we want to put on that, 120, 140, probably
Yeah.
should be 140, but.
Well, I think I mean, if we know that scenario 2 for them will get us to 75, right?
Yep.
And our option 3 or option 5, we'd still be at 75 on Tifia. And then if our goal is to use 75 from Tifia and we don't get all the funds we need and we end up having to go higher, we may end up having to bond that. And then that's when, once you open it, because things cost more than we expected, then on opening day, you got to pay that bond. And
Yeah,
whatever
that'll-
that bond is gonna be,
If we went out and maximized our revenue stream for a Tifia loan, would we still be able to bond on top of that? I don't think you could.
Don't look at me. Sorry,
You
because
would
I
still-
am
you would
not.
be able- You would be able to adjust your TIFIA loan. I mean, that, you would be able to borrow for your TIFIA up to the 33% of the total project costs.
And you could readdress your toll
then-
rate too.
Right, yeah, and then, I mean, as long as you're within, your 33% of total project costs and 80% of total federal funding towards the project, you could maximize your loan capacity through TIFIA. If you needed more, you'd have to adjust your toll rates. I mean, I think one thing to just sort of bear in mind in all of these scenarios is that, there are assumptions, as Lowell pointed out, in the sizing of the debt based upon interest rates. If interest rates go higher, your capacity will be lower. You'll need to get an investment grade rating. Hopefully the coverages that he's laid out are sufficient, but they might be aggressive. And so, there's a lot of moving parts here in terms of the total debt capacity. But as long as, ultimately it's about your sort of willingness to adjust your rates in order to generate enough capacity, your toll rates, in order to get the type of TIFIA loan that you're looking for.
well, I guess our problem though, Mary, is that we're gonna have to be putting an application in for a Tifia loan fairly soon. Which we might not even be drawing on for the next 3 or 4 years. But we're gonna have that application in, which means we need to have our tolls set at a place that we can apply for that Tifia loan. Or we need to show that we can increase those tolls when we do start drawing upon it in order to cover that. And so while it would be really nice to be able to get 150 or 125 million Tifia loan authorized, I don't think our rates are gonna be at a place where we can get there immediately. Because it just won't pencil.
I mean, the process for the TIFIA, I mean, you'll file your letter of interest, but the final application process is only going to be when you're going to need the proceeds, and you're a few years out from that. I mean, you can start sort of making the informal process, but to start the formal process before you've got a sense as to, you're also going to need how much you're getting from your other sources. Because TIFIA is going to want to be able to see a fully funded project. So we're going to need to know what's coming from the respective states before we start kind of going more formally to TIFIA and ultimately submit the final application.
I assume you'd want to complete a financial investment grade traffic revenue study ahead of that as well, right? Just as you
Right,
go to the
right.
bond market.
Oh, yeah, no, but you're going to have your final ratings in order
Well,
to.
and you have to have investment, you have to have investment grade ratings from a credit agency with the amount of loan we're talking about. I believe it's one.
Yes.
Credit
Mhm.
reporting agency will have to have an investment grade rating from one of the credit reporting agencies plus an investment grade TNR study.
Yep.
You know, all of those things. And the difficulty there is a lot of this happens pretty near the end because investment grade TNR studies have a very short shelf life. They get outdated very quickly, as do credit ratings. And so you get all your ducks in a row, then you apply and things move pretty quickly from that point.
Right.
So I think the tolling decision today is giving us enough revenue reserves to give us some flexibility with TIFIA. And how much, what number does that look like? And we looked at those scenarios of 4 is gonna get you probably more than you need, 3 and 5 is gonna get you close to what you need. And then you're just gonna have to see where you are and what you get from the state and feds. And we may have to make another toll increase somewhere in 26, 27, or 28, depending on what we see come out of the feds and the locals between now and then. But we need to do something today to get that revenue started and that reserve started.
So I guess for our conversation tomorrow, are you guys from what we're looking at, are we looking at 3? Or are we looking at 5? And what do you guys think?
How much money you're talking about raising, 75 or 140?
You're talking
I
about.
think you can only position yourselves to what you think you're gonna need. 70 is the absolute minimum you're gonna need if all the ducks fall with state and federal funding.
So.
I'll tell you, I'll weigh in. I think we ought to go forward with 2 options, 3 and 5, our 3 and 5 to the board tomorrow. And both of those will get us going in the right direction. We have one increase between now and opening. And that's what we promote. Now, if we guessed wrong and we're 3 years down the road and we've got better information, it's nothing to say that we can't go back and try and get an intermediate increase. But I personally don't like the 50-cent annual under the old bridge right now. I personally like, once the new bridge is up, we get a bump on day 1. And then every 5 years after, we bump it by 15%.
Right, and if
That's my
we,
thought.
Are we talking about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Like, are we talking about that, or are we just talking about the reserve that we need to get funding? What are we talking about?
Well, we're
I
trying,
think we're blending 2 things. I thought we need to get feedback for this study that's happening at the state level of Washington of how we want them to consider the range. Are we covering and staying only at 75 million, or do we want them to do 2 scenarios showing a low and a high end? And I lean towards the low and the high end, whether that's 75 to 140 or 75 to 125. I think it's very risky to just focus like blinders on only 75. I don't think that's accounting for all the variables that we want to be able to look back to this study and reference when things change over the next 5 to 6 years.
What I would suggest, if you look at the pre-completion scenarios, since only one of those matches one of the scenarios we're considering, I would recommend we pick either 3 or 5 of ours and add that to theirs as one of their other free scenarios. And not look at the 25-cent annual increase or 50 annual increase, because what I've heard all of our state working groups say is you don't want to do an increase every year.
Actually have not said that.
That's what I've heard the majority say that now.
We've been told that the port has adopted that as a policy principle. We haven't debated, we haven't heard even exactly why they have chosen that. We've heard some intimation that there are collection costs, et cetera, but we haven't really carefully gone through that and considered it. It would be premature for us to do that, I would think.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's how you integrate it, right?
If I could weigh in from the commission perspective, and we're trying to, like I said, we're trying to work with where you're at in terms of pre-completion in particular. So I really appreciate the 3 and 5
Right.
options, whether we just say, if you're going to move forward with 3 and 5, then maybe we have one with 3 and one with 5. I mean, maybe that's an approach. I do think though, as we look at the purpose for the study as really getting that financial capacity, the idea of having a high and a low, I think might go over better with our legislature to show that, okay, here's a part of this could be how it's framed for them, but 75 is perhaps the best, more a target, where you'd like to see things at if your bonding, if your other financing comes together well, other funding comes together well. But even if some of that does not come through, here's a look at how high, perhaps the high end of where it could go if that was needed. And then that gives a range where at least the legislature has a perspective on what it would take and what's possible. And next round, investment grade study, you could always come back and then narrow it down within that for further work. But that's a perspective to consider.
A comment, when we were going through 3 and 5 and a couple others with Kerry and his folks, we asked the question of the reserve, how much do you need to be able to qualify for a TIFIA loan? And what we heard, or at least what I heard, was 10%. So if we're going for a $75 million TIFIA loan, you want reserves by the time you need it of about 7.5 million. Now, what we've been kind of talking about, for a $150 million loan, we need about $15 million in reserve by the time you need to start drawing on the loan. And if you look at the two curves, they both generate 15 million pretty close to when we need it. They both come up to somewhere around $21 million by the time the bridge opens, but we need 15, 2 or 3 years earlier. And according to the curves that we saw, we hit it at that time. So to me, it says either 3 or 5. If we all did it right, we ought to be able to create enough reserve for up to $150 million loan. We certainly could qualify for the $75 million loan. The only issue is, do we have enough cash flow as we start operations to make the payments? And I think the answer is yes, because I don't know if Kerry's model took into consideration, the large increase in traffic that your model shows, which is going to generate more revenue.
Our model is not, the information that you got today, Commissioner, is new information for us. Now, CDM Smith's agreed to make that available to us. So the future iterations of our model will include, we'll be basing it on the same traffic projections that CDM Smith is. As time goes on over the next month or so, our models are going to converge. Right now, we're a little far apart because we're working with different traffic and revenue data.
Yeah,
but we're working hard to
Terry,
synchronize.
What I'm saying, when you do that, it's gonna make the numbers in either 3 or 5 even more attractive, that we can get more. than
It's
the
going to, in
$75
terms of
million.
reserves, I'm not sure that 3 and 5 get us where we need to get in terms of financing capacity.
I
And
think it does, and unless the 10% rule is no good.
No, he's saying in terms of debt service.
in terms of, in terms of financing capacity,
As far as on day one. can
On
we
day one.
afford to make the payment.
on day one, I think 3 and 5 will get us to where we need to get in terms of reserves for pre-completion tolling. When I say 3 and 5, our 3 and 5.
Yeah.
3 and 5, I do not believe, based on Lowell's analysis so far, 3 and 5 are not going to get us, are not going to put us in a position to qualify for more than about $70 million or 75 million. They're not going to get us to the 100 or 140, certainly.
So we need to do the math. right?
So Carrie, can we design in there though, that if you're gonna have another increase on opening day, and that can be built into the design for your
Yes.
TIFIA application?
Yes, and it will be it will become a covenant. It will become a requirement of your loan in the same way. And I keep saying this because I don't want people to lose sight of it. Everything that we're doing so far assumes a 15% toll increase every 5 years for the life of the bridge. That will also be a requirement of your loan agreement.
Correct.
Or through,
Well,
through
the
the
beauty
through the
of
term of the
this
debt service
discussion
or loan.
is it's really to try and decide an intermediate, immediate increase. We're not going for a TIFIA loan 2 months from now.
Correct.
We've still got time to play with it. We've got a new authority that's gonna weigh in on it. All we're really doing is making sure that we're in the ballpark and we're not killing ourselves by making a bad decision here.
Right.
Probably too low of an adjustment.
Agreed.
Too high is better than too low.
But this is not a request to the port for what we're asking them to do in July.
No, and what I'm telling you, I'll say this again, I say this every meeting. What I'm telling you is also not advice. You know, I'm limited to what I can do, and I don't, you know, these are observations. You do have 2 municipal advisors on the phone who legally can make calls like that, one of whom works for you in the port, and I think we are going to engage them to do some independent analysis as well.
Right. We'll get there.
So, Carrie, if we did 3 and 5 as the starting points for 2 scenarios, if that's what a recommendation was to the commissioners, would we need to, sounds like we would also then need to include a bump at some level above the 2.5 and 15%, either in the escalation amounts or perhaps a bump in that first year of operations for the bridge. And would then be escalations in place in order to make those, if you
Well,
want to have one, at least on one of them, to make it more than the
see, the
35 million.
big question that we don't have the answer to that would solve all of this is knowing exactly how much we need to finance. And we just don't know the answer to that question. So we're working in terms of ranges.
So
And
if we
we're
have
working in
one,
terms of a
yeah.
pretty big range,
We
right?
are,
We're
yeah.
talking 75 million to 140 million. One way to approach it, and I will ask you and in particular Tim, because TNR is, this is what you do. There's been a suggestion, is there a way to reverse engineer this thing where you say, what toll rate will yield 140 million in financing? What toll rate will yield 75 million in financing? And that may be an iteration
So
that gets you
Carrie,
there, but those would be great bookends.
So Carrie, can I put something out there that I think maybe resolve this a little bit? And Brian was just pointing the obvious out here. In order to get to 140 in 2031, you have and do a 2.5% and 15% increase. You have to be at scenario 4A and 4B. So in 31, we would have to be at 664 or 650 to get to 140. Based on the analysis they've done. So if our scenarios, I'll look at scenario 5, puts us at anything less than that by 2030, then that is the amount of increase you're gonna have to make to get to 140 in 2031.
You're right.
So what we would say is that we would implement scenario 5 today, which would take us to $2. It would give us $1 on each side. That's going into a fund that we hold. And then if we need 140, which hopefully we don't need any more than 125, then we would need to add another 75 cents in 2031.
Effectively.
Effectively is what we would have to do.
Cause you're doing $1 per year between 24, no, you're doing $1. That's gonna put you at 2 and 3. Up until 2030. So then on your freeze buy. You would be at $2, you'd have to go to 275 or 282.
I think we understand conceptually what we want to accomplish, and you guys can go off and do the actual scenarios, right?
I mean, what we just said is what the scenarios would show.
Right.
And are we, I mean, again, though, when we sell this, are we thinking that this is gonna be each way we're gonna do this on the new bridge? Or are we gonna do it one way, like holding it?
If you did it one way, this assumes that every vehicle pays this every time they cross the bridge,
Every
regardless
time
of
they-
direction. So
Right.
now you can collect one direction, but you would double the tolls.
Double it. But I'm trying to figure out, would that help us potentially on our 50% loss on the other
Just
side of
wondering
it?
that, yeah.
Because if that's gonna cut, if it's $10 and you're sending them a bill, I don't wanna be sending people bills for $2 or $4.
These are policy decisions on which we can do down
Right.
the road.
Yeah, yeah.
So modeling, we have enough information to go forward with this presentation. Lots of interesting issues for the authority to worry about.
But I guess in front of the Transportation Commission, we should put forward one scenario that's if you need to raise 75 million, this is what it is. If we need to raise 125 million, this is what it is. And we show that to them, like. When we look, I'm looking at the Tacoma Narrows Bridge right now. And same thing, we're dealing with the people that run that and it's $4 and $6. I'm not sure if it's one way or two ways. Haven't been able to
That's
find that out.
That's
Huh?
one way.
That's one way.
They only
So if
charge
you look-
westbound or eastbound on that bridge.
So if you look at the Tacoma Narrows and you say, well, whether you're crossing the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, you're crossing our bridge. You take that one way, cut it in half, and that would be a nice one to show. Representative Phi, hey, we're willing to pay the same amount you are.
Right.
What's their traffic count though? Daily?
A lot.
A lot more. than ours.
Yeah, much higher. Much higher.
We're not building a suspension bridge though.
They also have artificially low rates because of financial support from the legislature, non-toll funds.
We would love to
So-
have some of that too, Carl. Can you arrange that?
Yes, no, they did fully fund it with tolling, so I should give that some credit. They didn't have others, some sources of funding for building the bridge to begin with.
I have a question actually for how you guys landed on these scenarios of especially 3 and 4, those annual increases. Is that because of what has been done on other similar projects statewide? Or is that reflecting feedback that you saw and what you sensed our communities could support or that would not threaten traffic rates over time?
Are you asking about the 15% every 5
Yeah,
years?
the idea of these annual increases that came forward, because obviously our models, we focused more on like one significant increase and then going years without. So I was just wondering where you guys, how you landed on this idea of 100% and then the other alternatives are these annual kind of tick ups.
These were what, in part from to answer your question a bit about, partly from discussions with your staff and consulting team, that these were at least on the table towards the end of last year, recognizing that they were still part of a discussion going forward, not anything I've been committed to. But
Yeah,
also,
that-
it's somewhat similar to what, to say 520, when there was an annual increases during the pre-completion toll lane time, in order to ramp up towards what rates would be when the new bridge opened. Carries that.
The strong the preference that has emerged for a one-time toll increase is relatively recent. You'll recall early on, November-ish, we were talking and there seemed to be some idea or some preference actually at that time for an annual increase. Here, and I will say this, in the trend across the country among toll agencies is to do like 10-year toll programs where they go through the public process and everything, and they establish a 10-year toll program that typically results in an annual increase of some small increment. And that's made possible by electronic toll collection. They didn't historically do that, but now that almost all facilities in the country have gone electronic, it's an easy thing to do, and it allows them to do 10-year toll programs that give them some certainty about their revenue streams over a longer period of time.
And you don't have the public process every year,
Well, and you don't have the public process.
if you can adopt
Yes.
it for 10 years.
So Marla, this is quite a question for Marla. If we went with scenario, 4, how do you think the folks would receive a 25 cent or a 50 cent increase every year until the bridge opens versus hitting them all at once and then freeze it for, 5 years or whatever?
Is that?
Just to clarify that,
Why are we going there today? I'm just not understanding why we want to do that today. We're not working on the request to the port today. We're working on a financial model for the Washington State Transportation Commission. And these are economically equivalent, whether it's every year, every 5 years, whether it's today or tomorrow, all of that can be worked out later. The policy questions, we have a lot more homework to do before we come to those.
Okay, so what's our direction?
Sorry, Mike, I think we lost. What was your question? What'd you say?
Now, we can delay that discussion, but what's the direction for Carl?
So I would say that the direction should be, the goal is to show a $75 million bonding authority with one of the two scenarios. And the other scenarios should show that we have $125 million bonding authority. And that should be done with an increase this year in August, and then potentially an increase in 2031 when the new bridge is opened. And hopefully that increase in 2031 would be the difference between the 75 and the 125. And that would be my recommendation, because we hope we don't have to use it. And this is what it's going to be. If we have to use it, this is what it's going to be in 2031. And make sure that that is one increase today so that we're building a reserve for that future. That would
And
be
your
my
reason
advice.
for choosing 125 at the high end is because you're
Because
afraid
we've
if we do
always
140,
said,
that 140 is more than this community can absorb, so we can't.
I would say
reflect
that's
that.
far more than the community can absorb. And I also say, if we're asking for 125 million from the state of Washington, it's great to come back to them and say, we're in for 125 million too, if we have to be,
Right.
as well as with Oregon and the feds. And hopefully this bridge doesn't cost more than it needs to.
I like that.
I'm good with it.
Okay. Well, we can take that back, and I'll give a caveat that I'm staff, I'm not making a decision, so, but I think that's a lot of great feedback for us to be able to share tomorrow and then at the full commission meeting, and appreciate the willingness to think through both where some of the pre-completion options and the possibility of a range like that to help show
And-
what some capacity might be.
And Carl, your other ask was 15% increase every 5 years, which equals out to 3%. Make sure that is the one, I think that's the one you go forward with, rather than doing annual, it's every 5 years, so that people are feeling bumps on a 5-year basis. That's how we do it at the county.
And we can always revisit that policy wise later if we feel like.
Right,
it.
but
It
for
makes
the
no difference to-
design,
Yeah.
for the design, I think that looks fair and it helps. And so that you were looking for the direction, I think there you got.
Sounds good.
The other piece was the differential between breeze by and video. Right now, to be honest, I think the commission might lean towards model it like we have it here in Washington, which is the $2 differential, maintaining a differential that's stable as opposed to escalating both.
Based on that's how it's designed in WAC, I think that's probably the best thing to show them. The Washington Administrative Code.
Knowing that this will be independent from those WACs.
Right, right. But at least if we're modeling what we're doing based on what they do, at least they're looking at apples and apples when they're saying what we can do.
Tim, do you think this is something we can, have a lot to turn around in a sense for our discussion tomorrow, but would you add anything or any caveats you would add to this conversation?
I need to talk to a little bit more, but the direction is there to try to find the capacity you guys are looking for, which is good. And we'll take a look at the 3. If Carrie can send us the 3 and 5, we'll take a look at your 3 and 5. We'll take a look at that and push that along. We got the escalation set, so we don't have to worry about multiple post escalation for this study. We'll do the was it 15% at 5 years? No. I'm sorry.
15% every 5 years.
That's great.
Yeah, we got that. Yeah, we can go with that, and then Lowell and I can work with the financial model, and he'll come back and say, okay, see where we can get up to these, and we can do some moving around. We've got enough toll rates here run already that we can try to figure out what to target. But that won't happen before your meeting tomorrow, Carl. Sorry.
No, I think we can. No, that's okay. I think if we tomorrow come away with a sense of whether they buy into the same kind of concept you're just putting forward, or if they have some differences with that, we can definitely report back. We can let you guys know if they're leaning. Well, the full commission will be able to tell you on the 20th if they're leaning in a different direction or going a different direction with things. But if that's the case, know that when we come before you on the 20th, that's still the plan. There'll still be an opportunity for some final feedback because they won't make a final choice until April.
So one last point for your model, guys. If the scenario is, what kind of tolls do we need to be able to set aside a reserve for a $75 million TIFIA loan, and also to be able to pay it back once the bridge is open? The reserve, I think you need to think about, we would have to tap into that TIFIA loan probably in late 28, early 29. So that's going to drive when you need that reserve magic number, is it not?
Yeah, so you'll need to be able to fund the one reserve that you'll need to fund at closing will be your debt service reserve fund.
And that's at closing.
Right.
Mhm. And then the others, the renewal and replacement, the O&M reserve funds can all be funded pretty much over time, with through cash flow.
Right.
And that's the analysis that Carrie is going to do. That's going to inform our discussion with the Port Commission when we make a formal request for them to raise the tolls.
But again, coming up through this study, what you recommend as far as rates to implement now, whatever those rates are, to me, has to support the TIFIA close and when we need to start drawing those funds, which I would say is in late 28, very early 29. If it's 75.
Which is later than we had in our analysis, when they were seeing that, right? So that there could be some improvements in with that. Well, is there other points of discussion? I think we've touched on next steps in the work plan. We'd be happy to come next, when we come back, talk to you about the surveys. As opposed to going over those now. But know that there was good feedback that did contribute to the analysis that was for the preliminary tolling scenarios. But happy to we can share these slides, for one, after this meeting. Michael has them to be able to share, so you can review those slides on the surveys then.
So Carl?
Yep. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to understand, so as we're narrowing down the options, and this is being presented to your Transportation Commission, what level of policy decisions are we foreclosing on for the future? And let me just give an example. So built into this model is a per axle model. Are we saying that we are never, as a policy decision, allowed to reconsider that? Or can that be reconsidered as long as it's financially neutral?
You could definitely reconsider that. This is a planning level traffic and revenue study. And so for one, this really supports policymaking, funding direction going forward. When you're ready for financing, you'll effectively do this study again at an investment grade level, much finer comb analysis that will, as Carrie was saying, needs to be timed right as you go into financing. That's when you're really going to have another opportunity to hone in your assumptions around the rates, the policies, and other funding. You fine tune your funding need. So these are your best take on assumptions now that you think are appropriate, but you'll certainly have an opportunity to refine that in later times.
Great, that's perfect. So I will reserve all of my questions then.
I mean, it's great to think through them now, right? That's the kind of value. You have an opportunity to think through them now and apply them and see where it goes. But definitely, it doesn't bind you to those decisions, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's 100 different ways you can slice this, and I'm not an expert. I assume that the Bi-State Commission is going to bring in experts who are going to tell us, what best practices are, and when we factor in the fact that everyone's going to be teleporting across the bridge anyway in 2050, it's we'll recalculate everything based on that. The ferry opens. Actually, the ferry is foreclosed on in the ports charter. You cannot operate a ferry currently in the area that the port has control over.
No competing ferries, no competing bridges.
Yeah.
So that's why it died. There was one.
What died?
100 some years ago, there was.
Oh, the Panama.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Panama was the name of the ferry that went across. Yeah.
Go to the new skin then. Or not.
That's a good question. I'll take a look.
I've got one, Carl, if you could, can you summarize in 5 minutes what the survey, what were the high points of the survey?
Tim, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think he just said he's leaving.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Tim had to go, so.
We're already half an hour over our time.
Yes, we are half an hour.
We can.
I could
Carl,
say.
we cover that at the, what if we just wait and cover that at the 20th meeting? You'll be back in 2 weeks.
Yeah, Carl, you're due back here the 20th, right?
I am, yep. So I'll be happy to talk through it then. Yeah, no, I'll say the passenger car survey was really strong participation, well over our targeted participation levels. So that was great. And then the conversations we had on the freight shipper and carrier side, we had a goal of 20 interviews, and really when we hit that target from a wide variety of firms, both locally based and international and national firms, and was really able to provide some, if not both quantitative feedback and qualitative information that was supportive of our analysis. So happy to walk through that in the 20.
Oh, so we have no one running the meeting right now. Jake left. Oh, that's, oh, well,
Carl,
Jake
did
left.
you all have anything else?
Mike's not there.
Mike is, yeah.
Should I stop sharing?
Yeah.
So Jake left, guys?
Jake left, you're in charge, Mike. You have to run the meeting or else we're gonna sit here and stare at each other.
Okay, so is there any other things that we need to talk about today? We're gonna do the survey in a couple of weeks. Anything else we need to talk about before tomorrow?
Not in this meeting.
Okay. All right, then let's adjourn.
Great.
All right, thank you.
So just you for a minute. Get to Germany. Seems like those. Right.